Thank you so much for signing up. I'm really glad everyone could carve out a few minutes today. Hoping you can hear me and at the moment see me. We're going to talk over the next hour or so about a variety of areas that are absolutely essential, or at least might be worth some consideration when planning either a wholesale reinvention or at least a digital push for your student media outlet, either the college or the scholastic, the high school level. It's going to be almost 100% grounded in examples and perspectives provided not by outside pros. You guys have seen me speak, or I know I have a few former students of mine on here. You know how I roll. It's going to be mostly all grounded in the student press, specifically what some of the more daring and innovative college media outlets are doing and what some of the thought leaders in our area of the news universe have to say. And I know we're joined by a number of thought leaders as well for this session. I hope they'll both take away a few things and also maybe join in the chat or in some follow-up conversations that we'll have. Okay, and I'm going to attempt to go to the next slide here. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing a whole bunch of celebrities and random people, from Donald Trump to Usain Bolt to a minion or two. Hopefully you're seeing from the slide, and as a few of you know have seen me speak, I hate boring PowerPoints. There's going to be a few bulleted lists, but almost every slide has color images and just a few hopefully funny things to look at as I'm yammering on. I'm going to turn my own camera off now, just because, as James has suggested to me, less is more when it comes to the big marker system and just making sure everything's working hunky-dory. Most important, I want you to be able to hear me and be able to follow in real time on the slides. So give me 1 second. I'm going to do that now. Okay. So my camera is now off. The mic is back on. I'm going to wait and maybe hear from James if there's any real trouble, but hopefully a majority of you are able to hear me. For those who don't, absolutely touch base in the chat. Thanks, James. James will be able to help you potentially with any tech trouble that we're going to have. Specifically, some of the things that we're going to touch on in the next few minutes, linked to reinventing student media, altered production routines, and the new newsroom, creating the time, space, and what I call spirit to innovate, audience engagement and analytics, a few creative storytelling methods, not quite as much as some of my journalism of ideas presentations, but I'm going to throw a few in there. I love that stuff. And some stuff with branding and money making, depending on time, maybe a few closing perspectives as well on student media in print at the moment. We're going to kind of see where we are with time at that point. And I'll also be weaving in some traps to avoid from things that I've learned from student editors and advisors, just kind of weaved in throughout the talk. And I'm even going to attempt to toss out 10 what I'll call action items, things you might want to consider setting in motion or at least talking to your staff about right away. To up your innovation A game. We only have an hour. I've done a few of these, so I know how fast it goes. So we're going to try and squeeze as much in without being overloaded. But definitely do see this in some ways as kind of the start to a talk that hopefully will have many tentacles in the weeks to come and a few different methods. I have a friend who likes to start her talks to journalists and journalism students by proclaiming, I'm going to tell you some things you already know. I'm just going to say them louder. And that's also my goal here in respect to pushing for a few things that we seem to talk about a lot, but aren't really acting on, at least en masse at this point within college and scholastic media. All right, try and cycle through here a little bit. So just a few practical session stuff. I think James mentioned a few things. The video is going to be available forever, so if you're coming late, you have to get off if anything crashes or goes crazy. James is going to also send a resources handout that I put together that includes, for the most part, all of the links to things that I'll be mentioning or showing on the slides to come, just with the goal being that you shouldn't have to feel like you have to scramble to make sure that you get a certain headline or part of something that I'm showing on the screen. It'll be in all the posts and links that I send you. Please, let's use the chat function as much as possible, along with the connectivity issues that I know some people are going to have. To also maybe just keep a running conversation going. I'd love to if I can see any questions in the moment, especially something that might be linked to what I'm talking about. Definitely try and address it. We'll have a dedicated Q&A at the close as well. I wanted to point out, just from watching all the DigitalEd sessions, this will not shut down at 2 p.m. automatically. So if we're feeling really engaged and we're still going, we might go 65 minutes. Just wanted to throw that out there. We're not tied to the hour, to the second. Hopefully you're going to be able to see the slides. I wanted to mention, for those who have seen me speak, I love to throw in a lot of video and clicky things and active GIFs. We're keeping it to, what's known as a flat PDF. It's just, the very basic standard slides. And I wanted to throw that to those, those who have seen me do my thing in the past, but I'm trying to throw as much color and fun in there as well. I have not seen a session for DigitalEd that has not had at least one or two minor tech issues during the hour, so that's the last thing I want to mention. At some point, you're probably not going to be able to hear me, or I might even have to refresh my page, so please bear with, the 30, 60 seconds it'll take to do that. But I think overall it's a really cool system, and to Big Marker's credit, they've really set up a great thing here. All right, and then finally a little bit about me. I know a lot of you, I think, on here, so I'll just mention, for what it's worth, please call me Dan. I'm an author, reporter, blogger, journalism prof, student media advisor myself. Definitely like to refer to myself as a certified college media geek. Have written a pair of books, both for and about student journalists. Also write a ton about student media. So through my blog, through College Media Matters, keep a column for Pointer, a separate one for USA Today College called the Campus Beat. Also work with Mark and Courtney with MediaShift. I'm right now in Philadelphia at St. Joe's University. I'm a journalism professor and also advise the student newspaper at the school. Was previously in Florida, where I imagine it's much sunnier and hotter today, and at University of Tampa, where I taught journalism and advised the Minaret student newspaper. And even a few years back when I got done my doctorate, did some research on a Fulbright fellowship, turned into a visiting professorship in Singapore, of all places, and was actually paid to go thousands of miles away and study student journalism in Southeast Asia. So I love this stuff. I'm geeky about it. Even a former student newspaper editor myself at a liberal arts school outside of Philadelphia. Any other former student newspaper or student media editors-in-chief or similar position? I'd love to see that in the chat. You don't have to put the year in. All right. So I don't want to relive my college days necessarily, but I do, to start, want you to at least travel with me for a moment back to 2005. Tara, let's definitely talk about Singapore at one point. In December of that year, Newsweek, as you're hopefully seeing a snippet of it on the screen, featured college newspapers in a story, which I think, as a lot of us know, is a fairly rare occurrence for a national mainstream media outlet, especially given the fact that it wasn't focused on a particular event or controversial issue. It was literally a story that was just checking in to confirm that things were going great. And it features the anecdote that you can hopefully make out on the screen at the start about the editor of the Daily Pennsylvanian student newspaper at Penn. The fact that he controlled an outlet with $1 million budget, oversaw 200 staffers, and happily sent some of them to cover breaking news across the country while they worked with the latest equipment in the newsroom back home. And the joke is that the anecdote, of course, at first leads you to believe it's talking about the leader of a top-flight professional news outlet, and until it says that after all his work is done each day, the editor quickly races to class. It's probably the most cliche type of anecdote thing that I see with student media. The story's most striking quote that I thought, in reading it years later, quote, "Even as the commercial press is hammered by shrinking profits, layoffs, and falling circulation, college newspapers are thriving. As Deep Throat might have said, follow the money." Now, of course, if you do follow the money, at least for many student media outlets, beginning in that late 2005 period to today, from a pure print-based revenue perspective, the news is not great. Certainly, better or worse depending on the outlet, but overall, I think we can all, for the most part, agree, hasn't been the greatest stretch from that perspective. On screen, for example, is the actual and projected loss in print revenue for the Columbia Daily Spectator, the student newspaper at Columbia University, from 2006 to next year, and that has been shared publicly. And we know, of course, that the Spectator is not alone. And many student media outlets, especially those with a print base, have been struggling with traditional forms of money making. A few years back, USA Today called it a financial pinch, and I think that description still holds true today for the most part. It would, of course, be one thing if it was sheer financial difficulties, but millennial audience apathy toward print is also setting in. These are two brief snippets from a buzzworthy piece that I imagine a few of you saw a few months back, written for Quartz by the outgoing editor-in-chief of the Daily Tar Heel at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Notice how the start of it is kind of similar to the Newsweek piece. I find that interesting. You see the start at the top right. We've got the tons of employees. We've got the $1 million company. We've got the, kicking butt editorially aspect of it. In this case, though, the turn is more pessimistic, with the editor, Jenny Serrain, sharing at one point, in some ways, it's humbling to realize that the newspaper I spent so many hours working on isn't really beloved by my peers in the same way. Even some of my closest friends refuse to pick up the newspaper that I spent dozens of hours on each week. So it's finances, it's reader shrugs, and, there's even now some growing staff frustration. From everything I can see as someone who covers this daily, passion among student journalists is as high as ever. But is the print production routine still the bedrock of that passion? Or has it become more of the chore to get through, so to speak, to get back to what they love doing much more? This is the take of one veteran faculty advisor who had spoken with me for a fairly recent Neiman Lab piece that I put together, and that I'm going to share the link to in the resources handout after the session. In her words, quote, "While staffers used to like putting out the print newspaper, they began to loathe it and the long hours and late production nights it took to produce it. There's a problem when the editor-in-chief yells, 'Go to hell and take the print newspaper with you,' and half the room walks out." Still never been sure if that was metaphorical or literal, by the way. Maybe if the student population was reading the paper, they might have felt differently. Each semester they go out on campus, take a survey. Do you read the student paper? In print, the answer was a resounding no. And then just the last part of the quadrant for me, and just kind of setting the stage for why a reinvention or a digital first or all-in digital approach is potentially needed, I think cuts to the heart of kind of what our purpose is with student media at the college or high school levels. It's serving readers, of course. It's producing great journalism. It's acting as that watchdog on our campuses, within our surrounding communities. It's, of course, making sure we stay financially solvent so we can exist. But it's also, as much as possible, providing students with the training they need to succeed in the industry upon graduation. In announcing the Columbia Spectator's digital first push a while back, the editor-in-chief at Columbia University there stated simply, if I can paraphrase from memory, "We are not producing the best journalism we can if we're devoting so many hours to print." And I would simply argue that we're also more and more maybe not producing the best journalists we can in this new media environment if print remains their primary and overwhelming focus during their times in school with us. Media futurist Amy Webb, you see a headshot there and a tweet pic on the screen, spoke this past fall, as I know many of us know, at ACP-CMA, the National Student Media Convention in Philadelphia. I'm sure some of you were there for the session. I think she spoke in the last morning on Sunday. These were among the skills that she threw out in respect to what journalism and media students would want to push to have on their resumes and within their portfolios, either now or in the not too distant future. And so it's kind of an interesting idea, asking yourself, is their work on your student media outlets allowing them to fill in those blanks that you see on the screen, or at least sport resume items kind of like the ones she threw out? And just to confirm again, that's a snippet from a College Media Matters post that I'll be providing a link to in the resources handouts. You don't have to scramble to write any of those down for people who are interested. That's how we're going to roll here with this. Okay, so enough with the doom and gloominess. Just with some of the things I just mentioned, I know some of the things that some of us are experiencing firsthand as a backdrop. More and more student media are pushing for change. They're innovating more boldly. They're going all digital first, or at least much more digitally friendly. On screen, as an example, are the buzzwords from some of the announcements, editorials, news stories, or even interviews that I conducted. They're phrases and descriptions that editors or advisors have tossed out to explain or try and sum up the changes that they are making. That's all from starting, I believe, in 2012 or 2011 with UGA's Red and Black. Some of the more pronounced either digital first or just general reinvention efforts. That's the way that some of the outlets have chosen to describe it. I absolutely believe we are right now witnessing or participating in the biggest shift in the evolution of college media since the student newspaper first appeared in its somewhat recognizable modern form in the mid to late 1800s. And it's an important point to consider, because if you're thinking of doing this in any form, have confidence that you are absolutely not alone within the college media community. And if there was ever a time to join the media revolution, I would argue it is now. And just as an example, this is, the Oklahoma State student newspaper. And please give a shout out, by the way, if you are representing any media I actually throw on the screen. I know some names, but I'm not sure of everyone that I was able to see beforehand. The Daily Oak Collegian at Oklahoma State, they rejiggered a few semesters back to the point that they even changed their name, along with how they looked in print and all their online stuff. And they adopted their longtime nickname, O'Collie, just to kind of go with more of the vibe that they wanted to give off. Here's what the general manager of the paper, Ray Catalino, told me for a story that I wrote up for Pointer at the time that I'll again send you the link to. I've been holding off on reinvention. A lot of papers have been holding off, but now's the time to make the move. Whether or not we'll be any better off a year or 5 years from now, I don't know. But I've been swayed by the belief that what we're seeing from readers and customers is a permanent change. For the last few years, I've been saying it's just a fad, just that Facebook thing. I now see it's not a fad. We all need to jump in. Okay, so we're going to play a quick game of what I'm calling, just for fun, round robin revolution. It's going to focus on the outlets whose logos you can hopefully see and make out on the screen, and a few others. I did make some cuts to try and fit it into the hour here, so may not get to quite all of them, or all of them in quite the detailed manner I would love, but we're going to at least touch on most of them there. I want to share some of the more interesting, innovative, and in a few cases out there, components of some of the student media revolutions in recent semesters. Almost in all cases, these are based on interviews I conducted myself, even in a few cases, some newsroom visits that I carried out. And I wanted to start with one of the more seminal events in recent American history. In April 2013, when the Boston Marathon bombing occurred, it was just before noon on the West Coast. Editors at the Emerald at the University of Oregon immediately knew that it would be a big story, considering, as undoubtedly some of you know, Eugene, Oregon is literally the running capital of the country. And so there were likely tons of connections and interest in what was happening in Boston, even, of course, along with the general interest that all of us had. The difference between the Emerald of the past and the reinvented Emerald that had been put in place the semester before was that now the editors of the paper and their staffers could do something about that interest ASAP. That's because while in all other years they would have had basically or literally no one in the newsroom in that mid-morning, early afternoon time frame, or at least no one certainly working on the paper. They might be in there doing homework or just relaxing. In 2013, after what they had dubbed their revolution with a big R, they had about a dozen staffers in the newsroom already, and many of them were part of what the outlet called its new speed team. The speed team is comprised typically of newer staff writers who work in roughly 4-hour shifts, morning, afternoon, and night on most weekdays, and even, I believe, on some weekend days, maybe especially football Saturdays out there at Oregon. The idea is to maintain a presence in the newsroom and report for the web, feeding the 24/7 news beast and being ready for anything in the moment that, might happen. So, for example, when word spread about the Boston bombing, the Emerald staff was in the newsroom and quickly mobilized. They had a main story up uber fast. That's the first one that you see there. And they decided to do something they called stub reporting, where they just continued to build the story that you see on the screenshot of there, one sentence at a time. And the editor later told me it was like building a comprehensive story before readers' eyes. And they, of course, continued to cover things in the days that followed. So this is specifically what Emerald speed teamers do. So they're ready to mobilize to cover breaking news. They listen to the police scanner and check the crime logs. They're monitoring social media for anything that might be U of O or general, Oregon related. They're delving into a dedicated email account that contains press releases and community announcements. And I love this, kind of an interesting, just quick idea of setting up that account and not having it go to spam and being something that your staffers can delve into here. And of course, in their downtime or in between, they're also developing their own longer term pitches, working on stories, maybe using the time, the fact that they're there in the newsroom working as a chance to do that interview that they've been holding off on. And in terms of using the chat function here for what it's worth, while I'm talking, please feel free again to shoot some questions, either technical ones that James might be able to help with, or any others that you might have about what I'm showing on the screen. But I also wanted to throw a few your guys' way, in part just to kind of weird talking to myself and not hearing anything back, so just to make sure that people are still out there. For example, I'd be curious, anyone else have a speed team of any sort set up, or anything else from based on what you see on the screen, the slides there, that you'd have a speed team do? Tips-wise, something I mentioned, something a recent Emerald editor-in-chief told me was that they found early on that leaving the responsibilities for these speed team reporters too general or too much in the hands of their newer staffers led to confusion and less productivity. So it was kind of the sense of, a staffer being, well, we can do all this, but what should I actually be doing right now? And, well, what's more important or more needed? Okay, I'm getting distracted. I'm scrolling my Facebook and seeing. So her advice was be specific and maybe even have an editor in there with them at all times. So maybe editors take turns and supervise the shifts. So my first action item for you is consider starting a speed team, or as I'm seeing here, what some are calling a breaking news team for your staff, and having people in the newsroom on shifts at all times. Okay, so let's go to the morning. Katie Kutzko, who you see a headshot up of the screen, is right now implementing what she is calling a complete culture shift at the University Daily Kansan, at University of Kansas. Part of that is breaking the production routines that she feels no longer fit with modern news consumption. Like I imagine most of us see, she sees a large majority of editors not arrive into the newsroom until 3 p.m. each day to start their work, and staying until midnight, but almost entirely focused on print. Meanwhile, reporters basically never show up in the newsroom in person at all. And the newsroom is almost entirely empty before 3 p.m. So part of the change that she's pushing for is a morning staff meeting for the editorial team each day at 9:30 a.m. It's painful, of course, especially for students who think of 8 a.m. classes as torture and enjoy sleeping in, but she feels is needed. From her perspective, the old 3 p.m. meeting to kick off the day is very print-centric. And so this will be this will be digital first. All editors and members of the engagement, design, visual teams will be required to attend. And among the things the meeting will address, as you see on the screen there, is what content might be especially good for our social media staffs to target today. What stories might be worth featuring or teasing on the homepage, at different times of the day, depending. What campus events are happening that day to promote, or even write real time about. What stories have opportunities for extra digital assets, as she calls them, that we might be able to work on. Bottom line, she calls it a digital to-do list for the day. That would be another action item I would throw out for you, to start a daily or weekly digital to-do list, or maybe simply attempt one on a single day each week, kind of as an experiment. The idea isn't necessarily to have it be content-based. It doesn't necessarily have to be, well, we got to get 3 stories up today. It's just more, what can we do today that might fit in with our digital reading audience, that isn't necessarily waiting for the next morning to get our news. For what it's worth, the Kansan is also implementing a speed team. Just to give you a sense for what it's worth, for those who might be interested, those are the shifts that they will be having their staffers work in the newsroom. They're going to have 4 or 5 at a time. Part of it is bringing together student reporters and editors who might have interests across different newsroom sections, breaking down the silos. Everyone's working together. The key here is it's about the timing. So it's what might be happening when you're in the newsroom or what you might be assigned versus what you typically might be doing based on, a section or a coverage area of interest. So she sees it also as a bonding opportunity. The Emerald sets it up as a newer staff kind of boot camp. The Kansan, though, does it with everyone. So everyone kind of has to put in their time, kind of like a service opportunity for the paper. So here's a question for you. Do you have a digital to-do list at your outlet? I'd be curious, either daily or weekly. And I mean that potentially for the chat bar here, but also maybe as a big metaphorical or literal question to consider and kind of take back to your staff. I spoke with a student journalist, and I am seeing the chat comments for what it's worth, so I appreciate it. I'm going to try and dig out every few minutes here. I spoke with a student journalist at U of Texas at Austin this past fall for a post that was picked up by Pointer. Kind of got lost in the shuffle because I ended up posting it during the college media convention in Philly. But he had weaved some web magic and discovered that only 1 in 5 college newspapers nationwide or updating their websites daily. And I want you to think about that in the world we live in today, and think about, an outlet or site that you love to read. Is that something you'd be cool with, or would that lessen your loyalty to thinking about checking in with them and thinking about them as a must-read outlet? Maybe daily updating in some form is not your priority or just not in the realm of what can be accomplished in reality. And I completely understand that with the size newspaper I advise. But it might also be about perspective here, in figuring out creative ways to provide content on a regular basis that don't have to be the, 500 to 600 word text-based story mold. What I'm gathering from student editors and advisors, for what it's worth, and I'd be curious to see what others think here, is that yes, we're more and more in that post-story quota era. We need 7 stories to fill the section by tomorrow for the paper. We're post that filling space and time and working under a set deadline era in respect to print's decline. But from what I'm being told, students, especially student journalists, still need motivation and specific goals. And so the idea of announcing, well, we're only going to publish when something's interesting enough to happen, it sounds great in the press release you put out, but apparently in reality has not been working out wonderfully. And that students might need a little bit of a numbers game in terms of how many stories or how much content they should be posting or trying to post, either daily or weekly or maybe per staffer or per section. And for what it's worth, I found that not only with traditional student media that are shifting, but also new startups that, have tried to adopt the new media mantras from the beginning. In hopes the slide is showing up now, showing some staffers gathering in a newsroom at Oklahoma University at OU Nightly. It's also apparently still seen as a huge positive to operate in person as a team in a physical newsroom environment. A few months ago, I reached out to students who are part of my College Media Matters Fellows program. And if you're a student and might be interested, or you want to nominate a student of your own for the fall, let's chat. I'll send out a link. But anyway, I'd asked them if a physical newsroom still mattered in their eyes and from their experiences. And I wanted to throw this out because I think it's important to chew on for at least 30 seconds. Every single student journalist who I asked, representing a variety of media, publication schedules, digital shifts, all of them said yes, passionately, the newsroom still matters for a variety of reasons. And I'm curious how others might feel about the newsrooms nowadays. Has anyone dropped theirs, or is anyone setting theirs up differently? I'm always curious if you want to even tease it out in the chat. These are what the snippets from what the students told me. I'll send a link with the full rundown. And this was actually a MediaShift post. More bodies in the newsroom means less time to track down an available journalist who's not in class or at another job. Managers be able to look at reporters and say go. It's great when your energy is starting to flag and you need a little boost because you don't want to look like the slacker in the newsroom. Just no such pressure, and if you're working in your PJs from your dorm room. Another one, maybe most importantly, it's a social space where our team can meet, bounce ideas off each other in a free-flowing, casual way that can't be done online. And I mentioned this, by the way. I know a number of people have used this MediaShift post to show their own student life director or dean as proof. Don't get rid of our newsroom in the student center. We need this space. So I'll offer that for you as a defense mechanism. The last one there from the student. Our workflow is 1,000,000 times more effective when the parties involved are all in one place and easily located. I want to throw out a trap to avoid, though, with all this, just something to think about, when all the parties are in one place, but it's also who you're inviting to the party. Trap to avoid, something I'd throw out is the idea of assuming you can reinvent and maintain what, the buzz term has been endless innovation with the same people that you have now. You need to branch out. Diversity and changing up of your demographics can mean many things in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, but I'd also argue academic major, skill set, and the type of knowledge base and work that a student would bring to the newsroom. These are jobs, for example, currently or recently listed as open for new media properties like BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, Yahoo, and a few others. And in some cases, I threw in a few that student media outlets have created or are considering. Look, I don't know. Do I think the student newspaper that I advise here at St. Joe's is going to be creating a life hacks developer position anytime soon? No. But, when I read the description for it, I believe off the top of my head on BuzzFeed, and then notice how popular a website like Lifehacker or the college version, Hack College, or online advice columnists like Dear Prudence on Slate, how popular those continue to be, it does make me really think about what the related need might be on our own campus, and how best to fill it. Julie asked about the chief listening officer. From what I gather, I'm not sure why there's a disconnect between listening and actually looking, which is what the job is, but that's actually kind of a social media sixth sense person where they are monitoring student chatter on social media at all times, kind of listening in on the conversations, however prurient or gossip based, and trying to mine things that might be of interest or possibly newsworthy. Business students, tech and engineering students, definitely PR advertising, even art and design. You should be taking a close look right now at who is populating your newsroom, and how that correlates to being able to do what you need to do to survive and thrive, and also to expand, which we're going to talk about in the Moneymaking and branding ventures portion in a moment. And if you want to ask me, I'll maybe save it for the Q&A, but like comedy editor is one of those that I absolutely think should be added. I do a session on adding humor into the student press at CMA, and I just think in the Daily Show news environment we live in, the fact that, Amy Schumer's viral videos are basically the old school George Will commentaries, and just the fact that so many outlets like Jezebel are really bringing the snark with their news. I think students need to learn how to do it better and not just limit it to April 1st. But I'll stop there on that rant. So talk to me if you're curious about that in the Q&A. So my next action item is asking your staff what I will call the $750,000 question. If you are going to launch a reinvention or just strive for more innovation, start with what I at least call this $750,000 question. When the Emerald was thinking at University of Oregon, was thinking of embarking on their full-scale reinvention back in 2012-ish time period, the president and publisher at the time, great guy named Ryan Frank, who I know a lot of us know, he's doing his thing at the Las Vegas Sun now, came to the staff first with a big picture, no limits question. He asked them, as you see on the screen, if a venture capitalist gave you $750,000 to start a media company on this campus, what would you build? And as he mentioned later, that was the first push we had to say, forget what we've done for 112 years. Pretend you're running a startup from scratch. You've got VC money, venture capitalist money. What would you build? And of course, that type of freedom or wholesale shape shift will most likely not be possible, but it doesn't lessen the value of having at least one upfront meeting where you cast aside all the rules or routines or constraints and simply imagine what if. And the current Emerald editor tells me that she starts every semester that way as well. She sits down with her staff, and the first thing they do at a staff meeting for the semester, for the academic year, is to ask, if anything were possible, what would you love to do this semester? Or quarter, whatever it is at UO. It's kind of a, no rules, kind of like a Planet Fitness gym. It's a no embarrassment zone and kind of anything goes. And she said it was ultimately what led the Emerald to start their podcast series this past year that they've had some success with up front. It's even tougher, though, in some respects, than dreaming big like that is actually creating the space and the time for innovation in the long run. If you remember Jenny from the Daily Tar Heel, she told me in a recent podcast chat that I'll share with you that the toughest part of actually enacting innovation was getting off the hamster wheel of print production, and the lingering concerns about letting down the only people currently paying the paper. She said you can't stop focusing on print for one day to focus on digital and improving it because you have to make your money. You have to have a good print product. The minute you start to slip, your advertisers will leave and then you have nothing. It's this hamster wheel that you can't get off of. I don't know how you break that cycle. And now to start, everything she's saying is true, of course. There are the roadblocks right there. She also mentions the red tape just with staff. There it is, laid out by a top editor, one of the most respected student press outlets in the country. I think it also speaks to the bottom line consideration with all this. If you want to do this in any form, it will need to be because you are proactive and make it happen. The hamster wheel does not stop on its own. A very quick glimpse of that. Sammy Edge, the outgoing editor-in-chief at University of Oregon, I'll just read the top quote. She mentioned that finally got to the point where they realized it's going to hurt a little bit, in terms of the immediate loss of cash and figuring out what they want to do. But she said, we realized it was time to cannibalize ourselves because if we didn't do it, somebody else was going to do it instead. She mentions in a follow-up quote in a podcast chat that she feels like there's a general tone in college media right now with the idea, well, we're thinking about this whole reinvention thing, but we're not really sure. And she mentions you got to do it. You know, it's only going to work if you're actually active in that way. And what's interesting is that part of the push to have innovation as a regular part of staff routines is also what led the Emerald to jumpstart something they called the Garage. This is a small side room. It's attached to the main newsroom. It's set aside for pure innovation. So the team works there to regularly cook up new websites, services, and just bat around ideas. So most of the ideas fail or they don't get out of the incubator stage, but a few have stuck and have really been kind of interesting and in some cases money-making for the outlet. I visited a few semesters ago, and at the time the running joke was that they had a countdown on the whiteboard in that garage area, and you can see the garage through those bay window type things on the right photo. They had a countdown on the whiteboard counting down the time from the time that a new idea had been conceived to that current day. And the joke was that it never got higher than a few days. You know, they were just constantly pitching and tinkering. One example of something that they came up with that has stuck and is now linked forever to their homepage is what they call Insta-O. The O standing for Oregon, the Insta, the first part of Instagram. I love this invention. It's cool. It's a feed of all the geotagged photos that have been shared on Instagram by people who are located within 3 kilometers of U of O's campus. So it's automatic. It's not monitored. It's basically, you know, updated in real time like a Twitter or Instagram feed. And it kind of provides readers with a cool sense of, you know, what their peers are up to nearby or on campus, you know, in a way that they've never received before from student media. Show one more just, you know, slide example of it. And you can kind of get a sense maybe where a bunch of the student body is. Apparently at a concert that night that, you know, those slides were running. It's this idea that has also led the Daily Pennsylvanian to open their own version of the Garage. They call it, because it's Ivy League all the way, the Innovation Lab. You know, very similar to the Garage, the 2 buzzwords in the baseline description that they laid out when they announced it, big thinking and risk taking. And the idea was just making sure they set aside some time for innovation along with their news processes all the time. And it would be an action item I would throw out there is to really think about either starting your own version of the Garage or Innovation Lab, or at least working hard to align yourself with innovation. Because a trap that you definitely want to avoid is thinking of this idea of reinvention or innovation as this one-off or occasional activity. You know, we'll redesign the website every 2 years, or, you know, we'll announce this big thing 2 years and then not change for, you know, the next 5 or 6 semesters. Innovation is now not only essential, but kind of an everyday activity. For what it's worth, this is, I even put it on the slide there, possibly provocative statement alerts. I would throw out there, and maybe this is more of a challenge than in reality, but, you know, in a perfect world, I would permanently set aside, I call it the quarter innovation rule, 25% of your production time, your newsroom space, and even your staff hierarchy, your staff position, to focus purely on creating and sustaining a culture of innovation. Take that for what it's worth, violently disagree with it, roll your eyes, I can't see you, so it's okay, but I would throw that out to you. It's even something that led the DP to start what they're calling the $100,000 innovation fund. You may not have this type of cash, but there's no reason you can't Shark Tank it up with much less, or at least take in the essence of what this is all about. So here's the gist. I think this one is definitely worth reading. The Innovation Fund is meant to spur innovation in any form. It is specifically not targeted at just web or mobile or apps. A great specialty print special section, which serves a need in our community or makes us money, is just as valuable. Part of the idea with creating the fund with a big round dollar amount is to help us develop a culture of innovation at the DP. Hopefully with both our existing staff as well as with students on campus. You know, people who might have an interesting idea for a project and who may not have thought of the old school college newspaper as a home for that project. They mention what kind of projects. It might be jobs to be done websites, it might be some events produced by us or in conjunction with other groups, and their famous quote that went mini viral, maybe we'll buy a cupcake truck and use the proceeds to run the newspaper. You know, it can truly be kind of anything in that vein. All right, so the next section here, kind of audience analytics and engagement, second of 3 big sections today. Big questions, 4 big questions up front. Do you really know your audience? And I would say audiences. Are you meeting them where they are? Are you speaking their language, and are you including them in the conversation? I had a staged a hashtag college media Twitter chat the other night, and I want to draw a few of you in for this coming Sunday night for what it's worth. And threw out a question that's basically the gist of what we're up to here. I asked them at one point during the hour-long chat, many student media outlets are eager to reinvent and innovate more. Any tips on how to get started or what to focus on? And I was actually surprised at how many immediately pivoted to the importance of the audience. You can see a sampling on the screen. Focus on how your audience receives info and how you can keep them engaged. Serve the reader. Stay relevant to their lives. Go where the students are, whether it's covering a certain event or topic on a certain platform they're using. Just before he graduated, during his senior year at UVA, University of Virginia, a journalism student named Matthew Cameron put together a 136-page thesis on the current state of college newspapers. I've read it twice, and here it is in 7 words. Student papers are hurting, but there's hope. And I interviewed him about it, and I'll share a link to the piece. Again, this is a MediaShift post I put together. One of his suggestions from what he learned was the importance of conducting regular surveys or focus groups of student readers about what they want or need in a news outlet. And his research revealed that a surprisingly high number of student media editors and advisors are not aware of how often or how much their publications are being read. And he called that, to me, a big red flag. And the thing that I'd add to that, especially even for student papers already doing this, and I know we have a few advisors of biggies in the room who are like, yeah, of course we do this already. The one thing I'd add, though, is knowing your audience, but now more than simply what posts are the most popular or which newsstand stack is disappearing first. And the importance of bringing everyone into the audience analytics process, not just top editors or engagement teams. I like this suggestion a lot because let's be real, like how many reporters, for example, at your outlets have access to and are intimately familiar with your digital analytics? I'm guessing almost none at all, even though they're creating the content. Katie Kutzko at Kansan says this: everyone in the newsroom needs to be analytics literate. This isn't a task for solely digital editors anymore. Reporters need to know what their stories are doing, how people are responding to them. I'm not just talking page views. People need to see how their audience is viewing the stories, the entry points, the demographics, where people are reading it, geographically. They don't have to be experts like the digital editors, but they have to know how to do it. What's interesting is that when the Emerald made the switch to digital first, I think something that'll be very pertinent to people here, Sammy, who you see on the screen, recently told me that they didn't realize initially was that they were digital first in public, to their readers, but they were still print first behind the scenes, in their workflow and mentality. They had cut to twice weekly in print. So they were publishing on Monday or Thursday, and they were budgeting stories for those editions, and then they had other content scheduled for digital only on other days. What she said that the editors found was that even though they cut from a daily or 4 days a week, staffers were still working all out on the print material, and thinking of digital still as an afterthought. So it's not always about just cutting back print days and thinking that will solve or change everything. And I have another podcast chat up from a young woman named Julia Shumway, the most recent editor-in-chief at the State Press at Arizona State, who confirms this. As some of us know, the State Press went all in. They were the first big student news outlet to drop their print edition entirely. One of the reasons they did that, Julia told me, was that they tried going simply weekly and putting out one weekly bigger print edition rather than, 5 smaller daily ones. And she said it was the same problem they had with the daily print edition. Staffers just decided we're just going to go all in on what was happening in that weekly print edition. So just kind of interesting, something to think about. An additional problem for the Emerald, and the reason I'm showing this on the slide, is that they'd have those stories budgeted for print and be relying on them. Then the story drafts would come in and they wouldn't be great. And they had nothing else to replace them with because, of course, the next print issue was not for a few days. Sammy, though, figured out a way to solve both problems and appeal to their audience, and it was through analytics. The idea here was that they determined through an analytics startup that they started using called Chartbeat that their audience online and their audience in print are very different. They don't have much crossover at all. Be curious if you see that as well with your outlets. So what the Emerald does now is they publish one exclusive cover story just for print, but they pull the rest of their print content from digital stories that have already been posted and produced. And she said they specifically look for what does well and created a buzz online. And so here it's win-win. So it gives the staffers more of a push because digital is no longer the afterthought, but it's more of a chance to get your work online and then if it does well, in print. And it's in that order, so it's truly digital first. It also lessens the editor workload and their worry because there's no feeling of ever being stuck now. If some of the print stuff comes in, it isn't good enough because they've got a bunch of stuff that's already run in digital that they can pull. And it also, instead it's simply all in with digital. instead of having staff divided over thinking that print is still the thing that they should be focused on. Instead, they know that if they go viral, they can be plucked for print, and allows the staff to also basically do a soft launch for stories, or market test them to see by their online reaction how they might do in a print audience. So to me, this is all really digital first, truly, not just kind of saying it. And it was mainly accomplished by diving deep and getting to know their audience. Notice the second part of her quote on the screen, though, that she told me the other day. When they looked at the analytics, she mentioned that we discovered that a lot of the people on our campus don't even know we have a website. And it's also what other editors are telling me more and more, at least, metaphorically. And it leads to the next trap that I would throw out there that you want to avoid, and that's prioritizing your homepage over your social media feeds. Student media editors tell me more and more that 60 to 80% of their traffic is from social media, so responding to specific stories. And with mobile readership amping up as well, as we know, my only somewhat provocative statement here is stop worrying about your homepage so much. I kind of use it to get my own students to understand it here at St. Joe's. I say you can polish, your home's front lawn all you want, but it's the invitations that you're sending out that matter much more in terms of people deciding whether they're going to stop by for a visit. And I'm curious if anyone else is finding this as well, if social media, and specifically I'm hearing Facebook is kind of the dominant driver, for especially student audiences to read your content. If we had a ton of time, I'd dive into the awesomeness and quirkiness of an outlet called Stack.media, but I want to get to some other stuff and get to the money-making ventures here in a moment. So I'll simply say at least look at the link to a Neiman Lab piece that I put together on them. They're truly one of the only totally social news outlets that are out there among college media. And I just think some of the things are quirky, kind of out there, not for everyone, but I think worth a quick look at least. Now, I'd also definitely urge you to think about whether, how, and how often you are truly speaking students' language and kind of getting their attention in the digital and mobile age. One way the Emerald is attempting to do that is through an in-your-face kind of snarky digital magazine called Quacked. One editor calls it a catalog of our most candid thoughts. Another editor mentions it's all the crap that we want to say in the Emerald that we can't say because of advertisers. It's sexual, it's drug culture, it's all the things that the public relations department of the university wants no one to know about. Why not put it in its own place, let it run wild, let it do what it wants? They call it nonfiction and not news necessarily. Just an example of kind of 4 headlines from it, and hopes you can maybe get a glimpse of it. I'll include a link to it. Here's another example. Just a few others here. And then here is just a similar one at the Daily Pennsylvanian, something that they decided to start. They call theirs Under the Button. Now, look, you have to decide if this excites you or if this is like the equivalent of your journalism hell, or, if you stand with Aaron Sorkin in season 3 of The Newsroom and this is everything that's wrong with journalism today. I'd simply say in each case that I showed on screen here with the Emerald and the Pennsylvanian, it's one facet of the outlet's larger voice. Some of the positives, it gives students a chance to practice creating content in a style that many new media properties are using nowadays. I love that there's a genuineness to it that you don't often see from student work. There's a free-flowingness to it that I also think can not only draw an audience, but kind of compel students to be like, oh yeah, I could write this real quick. It's not kind of as scary as putting together a 1,000-word article. And the DP calls it under the button, but I would even call it kind of in between journalism. It kind of fits into the cracks of campus life and kind of presents the student voice in a more informal style that traditional journalism doesn't really go or focus on quite enough. This is Katie Cutco's take at the Kansan. We need to vary our content more. Why should we always write inverted pyramid news stories or news briefs? Why not write quick hits or what you need to know from tonight's student senate meeting? Why don't we produce videos and GIFs, I say the soft G, and a list below? My goal is not to turn the Kansan into BuzzFeed. However, we must reformat important stories in a way that connects with and appeals to our audience. Just another action item that I would throw out to you. I find this to be a very interesting exercise that I've done with my own students at St. Joe's in Tampa, and also ones that I did recently with the CMM Fellows, the student journalists nationwide. I call it the Journalism Junk Food Challenge. I ask student journalists, what they would consider their journalism junk food. So specifically a site, Twitter feed, a show, a magazine, any other type of media outlet or app that they would consider more or less their guilty pleasure. The stuff that might not have the reputation of the New York Times or 60 Minutes, but they can't help but check out every day and love. I call it journalism junk food, not in a degrading way, but just for its addictive elements. And you can see there, it's a range. It's obviously subjective. One person's junk food is cereal. We might consider that higher end, but another's is BuzzFeed, Vox. I effing love science seems to be very popular among students. Deadspin, Last Week Tonight, and even Amy Poehler's Smart Girls at the Party. I'll provide a link to a rundown that has some interesting takes on it. Then I ask them simply, why do you love these outlets so much, and what do you think student media might be able to learn from them? I show 3 responses there on the slide. And I think kind of interesting takes. We have to remind ourselves that we shouldn't be writing to please our journalism professors. Another one, as college students, we're forever fighting to be respected as real media. So we always try and stay so serious. But we're writing for a college audience. We can have a little fun. In another take, you want your newspaper to feel less like an ominous data drone and more like a student-run enterprise trying to make a difference. One example of this is a blog on Tumblr run by the Brown Daily Herald called F Yeah, and I'm leaving out the F word, Brown University. It's very one note, but a simple premise. Let students and prospective students ask questions about Brown and college life that they might be embarrassed to ask publicly or just want to get a peer's perspective on versus an admissions counselor's. It's uber popular among the students there and really extends the newspaper's brand in a great way. It's literally a very informal conversation with the community. If you want to take any advice away from today, if this hour means anything, it would be this. Start a blog like this today. Absolutely. Just a few, examples. I always hear about how horrible the housing lottery is, but I don't really understand what people mean by that. Could you elaborate on how it works? Could I make a class coming from this one research building to another if the classes are 10 minutes apart? Clueless freshman here. What if we don't end up completing the summer reading? What are the most popular extracurriculars? What type of bag would you recommend for students, especially guys? Do most people use a messenger bag type of thing or a regular 2-strap backpack? Is that first world problems? And mentions there, by the way, this blog is great. Just a couple other examples quickly to scroll through. Also something that's become very popular in a college media sort of sense. This is called Surviving the World. It's a photo comic or a web comic run by a teaching professor, I believe in chemistry at Northeastern University. He puts up a lesson on a chalkboard once a day. It's snarky, it's fun, it's sometimes a little bit insightful, and you can kind of even see its potential. Tell me that wouldn't look great in a Facebook feed, might get students' attention, and a great way to come at something that doesn't have to be totally text-based. We've seen the celebrities reading mean tweets. Michigan Daily went viral a while back with having their staff writers and editors read mean reader responses to their stories. I've also seen some student media outlets have some fun with getting professors to read their meaner Rate My Professor's ratings or even their meaner course evaluations. Look, the idea here, you can check out the Michigan Daily video. Is it as entertaining as the celebrity ones? Absolutely not. But I think it does cut to the heart of also what we're after with student media is that some of this is supposed to be rough and that they're going to be embarrassed by 20 years from now, but it gives them a sense of how to build voices in the way that will make them more effective when they're asked to do it 5 years later as a professional. And it's a fun way to show readers that they're in on the joke, and it's even great for staff morale. The Daily were sending that out on their own Facebook feeds and kind of like, hey, mom, check out, I'm actually featured in a video today. And one of the favorites, virals-wise, that I love, kind of an example of really starting a conversation with your community. Richard Deitch, one of the senior writers and editors at Sports Illustrated, saw this photo that you see on the screen here of, I believe it's 2 twin brothers, celebrating in or near the locker room after the Yale University ice hockey team won the men's NCAA National Ice Hockey Championship. And they just seemed so happy. He had sent out to readers, how many of you have a photograph of the single best moment of your life? And the responses he got were fascinating. It's individual there saying that, it's when his wife woke up after a double lung heart transplant. It's a guy saying seeing his mom after pulling a tour of duty. Seeing his bride about to walk down the makeshift aisle there you see on the front porch, hiring someone to snap a photographs of their of his surprise engagement in Paris. Even a dude who apparently had a really great sandwich, and that was the best moment of his life. I want you to think about what that means. But a great way to kind of engage readers. If I can throw out a Philly-based example very quickly as well, something that's kind of gone mini viral here in the last few months in the Philadelphia area, a mystery man who has started a Twitter feed and Instagram feed simply in real time, telling people and showing pictures of an area of the city that he is located in and promising to give $100 to anyone who can locate him based on the photo search. And in each case, they have 13 minutes to do it. Now, you may not have money to give away here, but tell me this wouldn't be perfect for a college or campus-based audience. As people are racing around and maybe would see a spot you are on campus and, I don't know, get free T-shirts, maybe you pull it in with a local business, have it as an advertising opportunity, just a way to engage readers in a different way and have some fun with social. One other thing I'd mention is to make sure you are engaging in that chief listening officer activity. More and more of the student conversation is happening either online or on mobile and social media through the confessions pages, through the overheard and spotted at pages, through the crushes and make-out pages, through compliments, memes, the fake parodies, even Yik Yak. So definitely, just kind of important to check in with. And the last thing here with audience engagement, then we'll close out with just maybe 5-10 minutes of money-making ideas. Just showing kind of the importance of Yik Yak there and people using it, and even University of Florida is actually partnering with Yik Yak, kind of collaborating through their Innovation News Center for a new type of news stream that they are up to. Kind of fascinating. It's still kind of in the works, and we're going to see how that kind of all rolls out. Now let me scroll through just to get to the fun money-making part of things here. Okay. So we looked at, just to kind of close out here with a few money-making branding ideas, we had looked at, the falling print revenue of the Columbia Daily Spectator. And it's definitely the reality for a lot of publications. What's interesting, though, is that at the same time that print revenue was falling, showing again on the screen there, they've really been engaged in getting their non-print revenue to rise. They have not found a way yet to, of course, completely displace that loss in print, but they're thinking a lot outside the box and not simply relying on the traditional digital advertising to make some cash. I wanted to show a few examples of what they're doing and a few others just on this last set of maybe 5-10 slides. So a few just money-making branding ventures to think about. One of the things they're trying are what the editor calls new websites that focus on some kind of non-journalistic information giving. The idea being to build on the fact that the Spectator and your student news outlet most likely as well is a known, news and information entity, and there's no reason that it can't use that base to aggressively go after students in a variety of new ways in more of a, information hub type of way. And so in this case, they've started a mobile app called Eat at CU. Just provides the local listings and reviews, special deals, and bonus features for local eateries and on-campus restaurants. They've also started something called Courses at CU. They call it their ultimate registration toolkit. They've got a course directory and reviews of courses, professors. It's kind of Rate My Professor along with a help with the registration process. And they said both have become quite popular and profitable. Another example, this ultimately ended up being short-lived, but when I was visiting University of Oregon, the Emerald staff, they were putting together something they called QuadPath. They kind of saw it as like an eBay / Craigslist / Airbnb / what would now be today like Uber. It was basically like, let's do ride shares, let's do selling concert tickets, let's do selling old textbooks. It ultimately was short-lived, as some of these things were, but just found it interesting as the way that they were kind of aggressively going after a new money-making type venture. What you see there on the bottom right is the whiteboard that they were using at that moment just to try and frame out what it was, using nouns, adjectives, and kind of their intended audience with it. The housing guides are probably the most popular and profitable among student media that I've talked to. There's Ducks Housing at University of Oregon, North by Northwestern, an online outlet at Northwestern University, has also put one together. I'm going to direct your attention to a link to a Medium post that the developer of that housing guide put up, Alex Dunner. I also did a podcast chat with him. And you can see it there. He mentions in the headline, your campus publication should make a housing guide. And he mentions it in his lead that it's consistently the most viewed page on our site after the homepage and has become an invaluable resource for incoming freshmen. Just something to think about. The last sort of exercise that I would throw out there for you, I love this quote. I think Jane is quoting someone else here, but she mentions the idea that, don't commit to a business plan, commit first to the problem that you want to solve. And one exercise that I know I do with my own staff, and if you've maybe been in one of the hackathon convention sessions that I lead at the conferences, is something I like to call spring cleaning. Each year, the Washington Post gathers together a bunch of big thinkers, members of their own staff, politicians, tech gurus, business leaders, and they ask each of them to nominate something that they would throw out from the world at large, or at least nominate for that. And it could be a physical, actual thing, or a person, or an idea, or even a hashtag. You can see some of the things on the screen there. It's everything from office chairs to football helmets to selfies to the third year of law school, a few others. Low-fat products, AP classes, the hashtag first world problems, flip-flops, even the entire state of Texas. If anyone's tuning in from there, my apologies, just sharing what the Washington Post is saying. It's something that I engage my own staff or even through the hackathon sessions outside students in doing is that, to recognize how you might be able to provide a service on your campus, first, simply start by complaining. What pisses you off on campus? What is not working? What do you endlessly or find your peers endlessly frustrated by? What I'm showing on the screen there are just two examples of, op-eds that kind of deal with the idea of student problems. There's an op-ed there at the top from Yale Daily News about, the amount of professors who make students buy their own textbooks and how it's kind of an underground money-making enterprise for the professors, or at least in students' eyes. What I see there, though, is more the idea of student frustration over textbook purchases, and possibly, in need then of a service or site that, could let them know what's up on, which textbooks are actually being used versus not, how to get the leg up on maybe borrowing or renting, kind of those types of issues. Same with, in internships or job site as well. I'm seeing otherwise email newsletters as another way to just expand the brand, get readers' attention, and also potentially draw in another advertiser or two. What you can see on the screen there is just a few snippets from a CMA listserv in terms of people trying to figure out the best time of day to throw it out there. The Columbia Spectator does it and tries to do it in the vein of one of the more popular ones that have been in the mainstream media sphere in recent months, called the Daily Skim or the Skim. And I have a quote at the bottom from a Daily Texan editor who he called this his journalism junk food. He loves it. I also subscribe to it. It's short, it's snarky, it's to the point, and it kind of speaking readers' language, and not being just kind of a boring recitation of kind of a links listing of things. Otherwise, photo services are growing. This is Green Wave Photography, just started in the past few months by the Tulane Hullabaloo staff at Tulane University. The idea being that they've got creative people on their staff who can take great pictures. There's always campus events going on. There's always a desire to, for PR purposes or, donor alumni pitches and just for historical records to have photographic and visuals of these events. And, administrators and other student groups thinking, yeah, sure, we'll hire the students who already have access to campus, who are charging less than outside professionals and who have this business that we don't have to search for. It's kind of right there as another way to make some money. Something the Emerald has put together in two different ways, actually. And literally just kind of the last 5 slides here. They started it by setting up a photo booth in random spots on campus. For those of us who attend different events, we're seeing more and more of this of kind of like right outside the hotel ballroom or in the middle of a crazy event. They'll have a photo booth off to the side in which people can get, real-time pictures. You even see it now like backstage at the Grammys, Taylor Swift posing with, with her boyfriend, things like this. They went out, had a staffer dress up as Santa around the holidays. Students came by. They got a couple hundred of them proposed for pictures. They were told later, go to the Emerald Facebook page, check it out. Students started liking the Emerald page. They were sharing the photos, tagging themselves in it, making the photos at least temporarily their profile pics. And it led to greater brand awareness and even interested them in setting up a full-blown operation that they call Photo Booth. And again, the same vibe as that green wave photography. And they've even now, in the very early stages, set up, just something to think about, a full creative services agency. So, they're doing photos. Why not video production? Why not web development? Maybe a social media marketing strategy. Maybe just overall brand development. The idea being that we want to build our marketing and services team not only to help our own brand, but also to provide services to the outside community. It makes the Emerald more of a one-stop shop for every type of information you might need. It attracts new staffers to join the Emerald crew and gives them a real-world experience. There's ethics involved in this, and as James is saying in the chat, definitely a different chat, just something to think about. I'll skip kind of I think magazines, books, special issues, special sections. I throw also microsites and sponsored projects. I think we're all probably more aware of this than anything else. I had mentioned to Carrie, if she's still watching, I had thrown out just a great one. Put a cute cat on the cover. That's the College Heights Herald at WKU. Their finals special section, a Stress Busters guide. They worked in 13 great ads and 16 pages. And just in a lot of them in full color. And advertisers love to be aligned with this stuff. If Jerry, you're watching, also threw something out there. Great work that you guys are doing at Cabrini as well. The ones I see making the most money: housing, orientation, graduation, the best of issues. The local businesses love those. That's the one you see on the screen on the far right. That makes more money for the Collegiate Times than anything else, almost like combined the rest of the year. I know there's someone from Syracuse here. There's a summer issue. The sex issues are growing in popularity, as I know some of you are experiencing or seeing yourselves, typically put out around Valentine's Day. The sports guides and also the year in review guide. That bottom right one is put out by the Crimson White. They did it in a past year in 3D, kind of cool. And there is the most popular print issue so far in 2015 among college media nationwide. In this case, honoring a legend. That's people literally lining up to pick up a print copy of the paper. Sometimes there's a legacy or keepsake aspect to these things. Often these special issues are great because students will want to keep around, have them stick around a little bit longer. And then I think the second or third to last slide, just a few others here. Often those commemorative issues, maybe it's for a fallen student or staffer, maybe it's for an anniversary. The body issues, not so much ESPN body issue style, but just kind of talking about body and health and fitness are popular. The one you see on the right is from the Dartmouth, talking about sexual violence, which has certainly been deserving of its own special issues. I would hope some of us engaged in this chat today are thinking about, issues of race, and transgender in the coming semester. International Student Guide is something I always push my own students. I think that's a perfect example of a permanent thing you could have on your website as well, because it often does not change much and could really be something that students check in with because they're always curious about it. Interview issue, the Daily Free Press puts together some great special issue stuff, even on music, as you see there. I Promise the Mean Girls staff, the satire issues are big. And if nothing else, you can go with marijuana. Magazines as well, something to think about. Even a few outlets have done full-scale books. So the Emerald does it by just putting together all the content they publish during a football season into a special keepsake book. So it's just kind of thinking like, what's your campus especially passionate about? What are you producing a lot of content of? Maybe it's simply a year in review. And it's often easy to do. It's digital, and it's kind of like, I think the Emerald team told me it's almost like 90% pure. And then if I'm still on the second to last money-making venture I'd throw out, and well, maybe I have to do a follow-up session with this. Crowdfunding is absolutely part of the scene nowadays with college media. I don't know of a student outlet that does not have a donor page, a Press Plus pop-up account, or has not done some sort of crowdfunding campaign. The Daily Free Press is a very profitable one. I believe just this past fall, if memory serves. It's something you're seeing more and more. I just wanted to throw out, I talked to the individual you see on the screen there, Kerry Johnson, in a podcast chat, just asking him kind of top 10 tips for crowdfunding in journalism. He runs a site devoted to that. That's a story that he wrote that you see on the bottom right there. I'd urge you to check that out. I'm sharing that in the links listing. And then otherwise, last thing I would throw up before we get to the Q&A, live events, I think, is going to be the next big thing in college media non-print revenue sources. The Columbia Spectator is having a ton of success with this early on. It's thinking like once a semester, what would be something that is a big flashpoint of discussion on campus, or is something that we are passionate about as a staff, that we might be able to simply draw in 20, 30, 50, maybe 100 people from our campus community and outside areas. We can charge them a little bit, use the campus space, bring in a few outside speakers and maybe our own staffers, and make some money, but also, do some good, raise the brand, and not only stage it, but cover it. They've had some great success with it, and it's just something I would throw out as well that might be worth making some money on. Okay. Didn't get to quite everything there, but I know we're getting to about 70 minutes. I don't want to keep anyone too long. Hopefully somewhat helpful there. And I will pop up the Q&A slide and see if anyone's left, if they want to shoot out a question or two.
Hi guys, James here, just hopping back in. Dan, that was really amazing, and we had great engagement and lots of questions.
Okay, great.
I think what would be good for us to do is maybe let's schedule an upcoming EdShift chat, or look at posting a blog post with some of these great questions and comments, and trying to dive into this issue in more detail, because I think there's definitely a lot of stuff people have to say. I think maybe we could try to do one quick question, which I think I saw a lot of people saying different versions of. Basically, when they try to cut back on the print side, or when they try to focus more on digital, to whatever degree they've done that, either the students have maybe said, hey, we're not producing a print paper, or that means we have free time, or that the space hasn't been, the time and space hasn't been sort of taken up by doing more digital stuff. How do you, Dan, do you have suggestions around integrating digital skills? Does it have to come from curricula? Does it have to, how do you get students to, how do you really structure and support digital initiatives so it doesn't just become something that people are, if they're not producing a print paper, that it sort of becomes free time?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and it is why I wanted to spend some time up front on noting the importance of still having that physical in-person setup, even maybe more than you've ever used the newsroom before, kind of literally, morning, noon, and night, and having people engage together in kind of the digital initiative, and doing it in a way that is really thinking about it as digital first. And that has been an interesting thing. I will tell you the questions are good ones, because from what I'm gathering from these kind of early pioneers, so to speak, in the college media digital first arena, it does seem to be the biggest issue that, these papers that are talking about dropping to twice a week, once a week, or even all in digital are still finding it very difficult to, engage their student media teams and kind of going all in. The one thing that comes to mind that I'm seeing some of the student media teams had some success with is to literally kind of at least metaphorically join the KTA, or kill the article movement. The idea that when they're approaching students to try and get them to be more productive and more real time, is to think about what they can do that would not necessarily involve an 800-word write-up before they could post, or even a text-based story at all. How can we tell this story in a series of tweets? What can we do to engage on campus in this moment that we might be able to crowdsource simply through a conversation, hashtag conversation with our readers? What can we do maybe via a photo slideshow, or a brief Periscope, or real-time streaming video feed? And even the idea of something like I mentioned with the quacked and under the button setups, of just something where it's more that, I once talked to the Business Insider editors. They say they're aligned at times for not producing Pulitzer Prize winning journalism and sometimes doing clickbait headlines, but they don't think about it as articles that they're writing. They think about it more as, 100-word conversations that then a few hours later become 300-word conversations. And then, becomes, kind of 500 words, and they're kind of building the stories in real time before readers' eyes. And that's the biggest mentality shift I think that needs to happen, is that it doesn't need to necessarily be perfect, polished, and complete before you post. And that there is a transparency shift, in that you're not only showing students, your readers, what and how you're doing, but also showing them things that are necessarily going to evolve at times even before their eyes. That's what comes to mind now, for what it's worth, in case that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I see there's still more questions and comments. And Stephen, I think your question is a good one about a smaller staff, and that's something I want to know too. But I think we ought to wrap for now. And I will, you can continue to post those questions on the conference page. We can try to address them there. And I'll also make sure that any major questions. I think that talking about a smaller publication, smaller schools actually could really be its own whole conversation. So post follow-up questions on the conference page, and I will make sure that we either get some follow-up sessions, bring them into an ed shift, or ask Dan to do some follow-up posts to address more of these questions, because there's
and I'll have the links listing will go out. I also I'm going to reach out to a few of you just to do if this Sunday night, if anyone's free at around 7 Eastern Standard Time, just to have a quick #college media kind of follow-up. I think again maybe to address some of these questions that we maybe didn't quite get a chance to, and then also I think we'll even go all in with the EdShift chat if that's able to work out. So thank you guys. I hope it was at least somewhat instructive, inspiring, insightful, any of those.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks so much, Dan. I'll make sure to post information about both of those things. Please take our survey. Just let us know how we did. And if you've got follow-up questions, post them, email them to me, and let me know, the best ways to get them out there, because I really want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to get all their questions answered and continue this really important conversation. So thank you so much, Dan. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Take care, guys.